Cool. So yeah, it's been a while. Eric, you want to go first since you put your stuff down on the agenda? I think you're muted. And this, it's my.
No, it's me. Sorry. Yeah, thank you. So, everyone. So I'm going to share a screen for a quick demo of the work I've done. And so I'd like to show you, well, the work for Jupyter Lab Master. So the latest version of Jupyter Lab with RTC pulled from last year branches. So we had Lumino data store, we had integration with Jupyter Lab, but this has not been maintained anymore. And Jupyter Lab has evolved, well, since 1 year, quite in some areas. And what I'm going to show you is the latest Jupyter Lab with RTC. And so what you can see is a very simple notebook with two browsers. This browser is Firefox. This is Firefox running so Jupyter Lab 3.alpha, which is I think 2 weeks ago. And the other browser is Chrome. Okay, running the same notebook. And let's just run this one. And this is hello 2. And what you can see when I type something, So this is reflected in the other browser. When you run something, it is also reflected. When you move a cell, that cell is also moved. When you change here the type of a cell, I think this is also changed here. So I'm going to move it back to Markdown. And when you select something in Firefox, this is also selected in Chrome. And you have like a shared cursor. So you see here in Chrome, you have like a caret. And if you go there, you see this is someone, which is anonymous by default. So this is someone else, but we don't have any authentication at all. We don't have any notion of who is doing what yet. Reverse, yeah, I have that caret, which is a caret of the Firefox guy. Sorry, the Chrome guy, which is here. What I can show you also is the messages which go through the Python server. So this is when you type something, this is a kind of JSON which goes through the browser and the server. So you would see like, I'm going to try to type something here. Hello. So this should be reflected somewhere. Okay, I cannot find it directly, but yeah, this is something like that. O. I have typed O. And this is a kind of message which travels the network. And I have typed before something else. And it should be somewhere L, should be here. But between the L and the O, because we're moving the cursor, we have those actions also. And only after 2 messages, I've got the O. Yeah, so that's a demo.
Nice. Was it a lot of work to get it up to date on newest Jupyter Lab?
It was, yeah. I mean, well, it's not only Jupyter Lab, it's also a bit of Lumino. I think the big deal was the server adapter, which has been introduced, and before it was a broadcast handler. That was something which I'm still not sure, but in Lumino, I had to change also a bit to deal with that server adapter. And before going to the server adapter, simple, I mean, as the cells and so on, it was not like a merge, so I wasn't able to take back the history. I mean, in a way, I had to apply portion by portion the patch. So I was not like merge or rebase. I mean, it was completely, for me, not possible to do that. And I think the goal is just to now to have something more modular, so we can link to the evolution of what we do in RTC.
Cool. And was it helpful, like a learning experience to have to pull it all together, or?
For me, it was very useful. I mean, I've learned a lot on RTC. I've learned a lot of the different messages going through, and also in terms of user experience, I was able to at least to identify the different parts of Jupyter Lab where we had to impact.
Did you have to add that cursor stuff and the highlight?
No, it was working.
It was
Yeah, what I have done also is disable the new extensions. I mean, the talk, table of content, the debugger, the log console, because yeah, the model has changed and the way objects are constructed, notebooks and so on. I mean, in that implementation, the construction of the object has changed. So it broke in a way the new tags, the new debugger, the new log console, and the new cell tags, I think so. So I didn't want to invest more time to align those extensions because, well, I could have done that, but I just wanted to make sure we had something to build on and to link with the work we do now in RTC and to showcase that in lab.
cool. Yeah, that's awesome. You got that working. And you started to sketch out some stuff for the talk at JupyterCon?
Yeah. This is something I'm working on, not very far yet. I still need to build some slides because it's a talk, a 25-minute talk. So my goal is just to present what we have so far. I mean, the examples, the repository, our goal, and maybe Jupyter Lab so far, and maybe what you have done. So I still don't know. I'm just building stuff, slides. So if anyone wants to write a comment on, there is an issue I have open, and anyone can put something there. If you have an idea, or if you want me to talk about a specific subject.
Cool. Have you started making the slides? But you want to link to them? Okay.
Not yet. Not yet.
But yeah, I guess when you start, you could just throw a link to them in there too, so we could take a look.
Yeah, I will do that. It should be in a few days. I mean, this week I want to give a first version, probably in 2 or 3 days this week.
Cool. That sounds good.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I'll share next. Let's see. Just get this set up. So share my screen. So yeah, I've been working on this server extension called Jupyter GraphQL. And so this works with the new Jupyter server, which is just like the Jupyter app minus the notebook. It's just the APIs. And so the idea is to layer on top of the existing REST APIs some GraphQL and a GraphQL endpoint that would store more of the state of the current server than is stored currently. So like all the executions and the current state of all the notebooks, even if they're not saved to disk. So it's sort of like the in-memory representation that we currently have in Jupyter Lab, but stored on the server side. So yeah, if we start that up, so we have our normal Jupyter server, and then we can launch this GraphQL editor dealio. And so I've only added a few things. One so far from the Jupyter server, one thing is the kernel specs. So I can get all the kernel specs and their names and IDs, etc. So things like this. So that's null. So and then we can also look up a kernel spec by its name. So I can say kernel spec name Python 3. I can get different information about it. Yeah, so this is hooked into the Tornado server. At first, I thought I would have it be a separate thing and talk over HTTP and WebSockets to the Jupyter server, but it seems much easier just to plug in directly. So this is all running in the same Python process. So it means we can talk directly to the kernels over 0MQ. We don't have to go through WebSockets. And then the idea is to expose information about executions and such through GraphQL through subscriptions. So yeah, I added some notes on what the next steps there are, but also Nick posted some information about how he hooked up Tornado and GraphQL, so that was useful. I cribbed some of that and updated it a little bit. So that's good, that's working. And then, yeah, so I guess from the high level, this is sort of a bottom-up approach of storing most of the data on the server. And then the idea would be to layer the RTC on top of this. So by default, you could just use GraphQL to edit notebooks, execute cells, etc. But then for a more interactive experience, say like in Jupyter Lab, the idea would be to explore how we could layer sort of an RTC component on top of that to make live editing collaboration easier. And sort of the rationale is that GraphQL is already a very well-defined spec, so we have like our schema here for Jupyter, and so we have things like the kernel spec, etc. And so the nice thing about this is we can document this, and then different clients can implement this endpoint however they like. So it's a nice way to be really explicit about what the protocol is that we're defining, because we can leverage all the work already being done in the GraphQL community to yeah, basically type what data is available and how to fetch different data from the server. Yeah, so that was the demo I had. Happy to answer any questions or if any other folks have thoughts on this approach.
Hey, thanks, Al.
Oh, hey, Darren.
I asked in the chat, but it came up at the exact right time. is there a way for these to be defined by the type definitions in the services package so that we don't have two definitions?
I think one of those directions, yeah. I think so there's a lot of tooling in the GraphQL community to either go from TypeScript to GraphQL or from GraphQL to TypeScript. So there's like code gen tools that allow you to do that. So yeah, ideally either that schema would generate a bunch of typings that you could use, or we could experiment with using TypeScript types to generate that schema. But I haven't started on that yet.
Gonzalo had a question too.
So the schema will live in the front end. Yeah, the schema is shared, I guess, between the clients and the server. So as the server, you need the schema to declare what endpoints you expose. And then as a client, you don't need the schema to query things. But as we were saying, like you could generate sort of client code to access the API in a type safe way using the schema, if that makes sense. And each component, what do you mean by component? Just how to keep the front end. Yeah, so we'd want to generate some, like Darian was asking about, yeah, generate some TypeScript basically package that will let you access all these methods using the schema.
Yeah, so you developed a Jupyter server extension for that, I think. Yeah, very good. But for now, it is about asking the kernels and probably after requesting the execution of code.
Mm-hmm.
It is about replacing the REST API. Today, it is about that. But tomorrow, what do you want to achieve? Do you want to ask GraphQL to do RTC for us, or do you want to use that below our implementation?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, that's still a bit fuzzy. I guess the outlines that I have are that there's a lot of momentum in the GraphQL community. So if we can figure out ways to layer RTC on top that is agnostic to different GraphQL specs, then that will have more legs, I guess. And we might be able to get more help supporting that. And so one way that I've been thinking about that, like if you have GraphQL endpoints for moving cells around in a notebook or adding text inside of a cell, right? So you'd have like a mutation that you would say, edit this cell, maybe add this text here. You could do that all through GraphQL, right? But the RTC helps because it allows you to more efficiently ship the changes between the clients, right? That's the whole point of the CRDT stuff, so that you can merge the changes more easily. And so my thought there was like, if two clients are both connected to the CRDT server, they would be exchanging changes through that, like you were showing, right, with Jupyter Lab. And then at some point it would synchronize to the GraphQL server. So either every change, it would maybe send both, like the GraphQL server is sort of like the long living state. And then I see that the CRDT server is just about sort of the shorter term, right? It's more like, hey, I'm typing right now, you're typing. Okay, we can synchronize all these changes and now we're at the same state. And now one of us or both of us or some server node, right, says, all right, server, the current state of the document is this. And that maybe is some kind of like collapsed version of, hey, we did all these changes. Now take this bundle and say, hey, this is the current. I don't know. That's like, as you can see, kind of preliminary. But just trying to think about ways, yeah, that we can layer it on top that is sort of like tangential to Jupyter itself, right? That is more just about, hey, I have some GraphQL schemas and maybe there's some mutations and there's some way to layer real-time component on top of those. So
is there a way, does GraphQL allow you to have basically blobs? So one thing that we want to CRDT is the state database, so that we can get rid of workspaces, and really you just have the same workspace open in 20 windows, they all modify it and it's fine. But in order to get that to work, we don't control the contents of the state database, each extension does. So would this support that kind of use case?
I mean, if yeah, that's an interesting question, because I guess from an untyped, you could just have a mapping kind of thing. So I guess I hadn't thought that much yet about how we store Jupyter Lab state with this system, at least starting with just how do we store Jupyter state? And then the question of, oh, well, I'm an extension and I have my own state, right, that I want to persist. Yeah, I think that needs more thought about how that works, basically. I mean, it's in the current system with the data store and all that kind of stuff, it makes sense, right? Because in that system, you're basically shipping all the changes to everyone. So everyone has the same database of everything. And that's really nice for things like UI state, right? But for things like server state, like the state of a notebook or execution, you don't really want everyone to have everything, because it maybe is too big, or you need some way to say, hey, I only want this notebook, or etc. So that's sort of where the GraphQL part is helpful, because it's like, I don't want all my data everywhere, right? That's just too much. That would be nice, and if we could do that, that'd be a lot easier, but it's not really viable. At least that's what it seems like. We need to implement some kind of pagination or sharding or something at some point. So the idea was, all right, well, let's just use GraphQL for that, because it already has mechanisms to talk about fetching partial data, stuff like that. So yeah, I guess I'm saying I'm not sure yet how that will play together.
Yeah, to be honest, the API for the state database itself would probably have to change, right? The state database just says, give me a key and a value, and the value is basically untyped. I can't remember if it's arbitrary object or if it's a string that it's going to parse or something, but whatever it is, it's untyped. It could be that in order to implement this, the state database API has to change to be typed in a way that can be turned into records in a data store, in which case it plays by the same rules that you're currently playing by. So fair enough.
We can store untyped stuff just as JSON blobs. Like,
okay.
Yeah, like the current cell outputs, for example, like they're not typed, right? It's just like blob of JSON. And there's currently an open GraphQL like issue about this. Right now, they just recommend store it as a string of JSON.
Okay. Yeah. So the state
like
database
standard.
takes an arbitrary JSON value.
Yeah. So like right now I'm using that. I have it lets you define literal types, but they're just strings, but with different names. So it's called JSON, but it's just literally just a string. So that's pretty standard.
Yeah, maybe so to add to the idea of a central state, which is from time to time updated by the clients. Well, it makes me think, I didn't mention that why I was showing the demo, but I've been a bit, well, maybe it was expected, but I've been a bit surprised when with the history, when you open a notebook, what it does, it pulls the complete history of that notebook. So with today Lumino data store, and I think it has been raised on the issues at some point. But when you open the notebook, if the notebook has been updated since days or months, you will get that month's history. And no choice for that. I mean, you get all the bits and movement and changes, and the client has to reconciliate and to merge all that. So he has to play the complete history. which with what you described, with the central server, which is from time to time updated with the state. It could be something which will help with that.
Definitely. Yeah, that was another motivation from talking to William Stein too, right, around CoCalc. And yeah, that sort of we need two systems, one that's the short-term system and then the longer-term checkpointing kind of like system. And so I think, yeah, we'll have to tune that in some way, but yeah. And so I think those are all the interesting questions. So I'm hoping to get through this sort of rote, but needed part of building out this GraphQL server that just reflects everything in the Jupyter server. Like that's pretty, there's not really many decisions there. I think it's just mainly, implementing things. And then I think once that's done, then the more interesting or more unknown parts we'll have to dive into, like how do we keep them in sync and how do they work together? Well, anyone else have any thoughts before we adjourn? Thanks for joining.
I'm going to move to the chat example, trying to build something with our existing packages. So I hope next time I will be able to showcase something with the chat.
Cool. That sounds good. Yeah, I hope by next time I'll be able to showcase executing some code with the GraphQL endpoint.
So out of curiosity, how confident are you in GraphQL now that you've been playing with it? Like, is this the right way of going? Or is it still exploratory for you?
I think it seems like the right way of going, somewhat based on technology, but more based on community, I would say, than anything. And that the fact that there's a lot of good discussions, it seems like, happening around the GraphQL spec and different packages that interact with it that are all kind of focused on the same questions we're trying to tackle around how do we ship data from client to the server and how do we specify that. So yeah, it seems like it's just like if we can kind of figure out how that makes sense in our world, then that'll allow us to just more so ride the wave that's already happening and add where we can. But at least that's the most attractive part from my perspective, is just being able to plug into a larger community. And so everything's not perfect there and they haven't figured everything out, but there's definitely a lot of eyes, and it seems like the process around that stuff seems pretty healthy from looking at like this GraphQL spec repo and some of the issues there that are being talked about. I don't know, that's my initial read, but do you have any thoughts on the process?
I don't know this. No, I don't know the space well enough to have an opinion here. So I'm mostly curious. I don't, like there's a level of confidence you need to feel when you pick a technology that you think is going to last you maybe like it's going to sort of make you commit to about like 10 years or something. That's, like that's the order of magnitude we're talking about. So I neither have a strong opinion about which way to go, nor would I be in a hurry to, like, this is a good thing to deliberate on. So that's sort of why I am curious what your confidence in it is, because that's usually what I need to feel before I commit to something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess all of this is still provision. I mean, there's a lot of stakeholders in this space, of different clients and users, etc. So I think all of this is still provisional until there's buy-in from folks, and until we can say, hey, that you can actually build a product out of this that solves user needs, right? It's all provisional, I would say. Even then, you know, it's still provisional until we say, all right, let's make a JEP for this and standardize it. So I think we're still a long way off from that. I wouldn't say like we're ready to do that at this point at all. So in that sense, it's still very exploratory, but just at least from my feelings about it, it feels good at the moment because it does give us a spec to build off of, and otherwise we're sort of building our own spec for a lot of this. So that part is like appealing.
Yeah. No, I understand. Cool. Thank you.
Sweet. Yeah, thanks for coming. And yeah, also it's sort of been a, you know, it'll take a little bit more finagling to get something out of it, but it's helpful to have questions from folks who haven't been, you know, as involved too, because it's easy to be caught in whatever, you know, hole.
Yeah, no, I appreciate getting some insight into what's happening. I would like to pay more attention to this. This is important stuff. So thanks for indulging my questions.
Of course, yeah. All right, sounds good. Well, I will post I have better internet now, so I should be able to actually upload the videos. So I'll post a link on the notes and upload this video. And see you all in a couple weeks, probably sooner.
Cool. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.